Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, we're going to be going over the metagame minute report that LSS put out, talk about the week 2 of ProQuest season as well as the battle harden that took place, and just give our general thoughts on the meta as we're heading into our first real set week, in my opinion, of a post-Dromi ProQuest meta, as well as other metas going into the battle harden Richmond and a couple other events. So we'll get right into it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully enjoy your stay. If you're a long-staying supporter, thank you so much as always. Feel free to check out the Discord down below for access to a really cool community. We're being super active in there right now with a lot of talk about the upcoming sets. That's been really fun. If you want to support the channel a different way, if you've been watching the channel for a while and you want to do it a different way, there's definitely access to channel memberships down below, different tiers and different giveaways for each. So definitely check that out. But I'll bring it up here really quick. So the metagame minute, first off, I've said this before on the channel, but go read LSS's articles. They've been really good about making fun and in-depth articles to kind of give people pictures of the meta or of event reports and stuff like that. So definitely please go check those out. This is the metagame minute for ProQuest Amsterdam, right? The ProQuest leading to the Pro Tour Amsterdam for week 2. And the biggest thing about this week was that Dromi left the format right after week 1. So this is the first full weekend of ProQuest without Dromi in it. It's so funny because I saw a meme. It was assassin players rejoicing because Dromi's left, and then Prism's behind them looking at it. So a lot of people going into this week, I think, thought that assassin was going to be really good, or that was going to get a big jump. And yes, they technically did, but I think, and we'll talk about it here in a second, I think some of the meta just isn't conducive for assassin right now. I don't think assassin's unplayable by any means. It's just, we'll talk about it. But anyway, as you can see, we had the classic constructed wins. KO led the pack at 15 wins. That's not super surprising for me. I think there was a lot of representation for a lot of different people. And as you can see, the difference between the top deck and the third place deck tied for third place is only 2 wins, right? Which is nothing. So KO being the top doesn't surprise me. Has a good Prism matchup, decent Azalea matchup, as long as he doesn't get hit with a crazy disruption. He has a good Victor matchup. It's 50-50. It's very skill intensive, but pretty good. The only bad matchup that KO really has, in my opinion, at the top there is Kasai. Kasai can be a little bit wishy-washy depending on what happens. But other than that, KO has pretty good matchups in the rest of the meta. And that's what you're going to notice here is I think right now, my first impression for this is, I'm not just saying this because of the win totals. I think this is really where we're at. I think we're in a 5-deck meta right now where 5 decks are all kind of battling each other, right? You have KO, Azalea, Prism, Victor, and Kasai. I think those are the 5 best. I think Kasai and Dorinthia flipped once Dromi left because Dorinthia was a lot better into Dromi, but now that Dromi is gone, I think Kasai's alternative currency at the end of the game, as well as Blood on Her Hands and Raise an Army, can really help in those matchups. Some of those other meta matchups. So Kasai's kind of flipped back to being the best warrior deck. But those 5 decks, I think, are leading the top of the pack. Now, does that mean any other decks are unplayable? No, it's not like the old 3-deck formats where it's if you're not playing these decks, you just lose. It very much is. These 5 decks are just, I think, the most consistent of the bunch. So Azalea being at 14 was surprising for me. I did think Azalea would be better. Obviously with the battle harden and the calling win, right, a lot of popularity for the deck, but I expected a lot of people to just naturally side in defensive options because, again, like I said in my last meta video, in lieu of not knowing what to side for, there's 2 things that most Flesh and Blood players side in their decks: poppers and defense reactions, or defensive options, right? So I was expecting Azalea to not struggle by any means. I just thought she'd be down where where Rhinar is, right? 8-9 wins, maybe 10, basically Rhinar, Kasai area. So to see her be the second most deck was a little surprising for me. Prism being this high, I expected most all Dromi's, I feel like they would just shift over to Prism for the most part. And Prism, although a very, very skill intensive deck, just does some really stupid stuff. And when you play decks like Azalea and decks like Kasai and stuff like that, yes, they're skill intensive, but it's not as crazy as the heavy popper decks. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Prism did well. She's been gaining popularity week by week. And then Victor and Kasai being better makes complete sense to me. So the top 5 aren't too surprising. The biggest surprise was Azalea. I didn't expect Azalea to be second. Then we go down the list. There's a lot of cool surprises. Reinhardt being an 8 is actually really cool. I didn't think Reinhardt would be that high. Probably because it's a natural counter into Prism. It does pretty well into Azalea because it can just kill him. Does really well into Victor because of the Intimidate mechanic. So it makes sense. Reinhardt is actually he's been kind of like this for a little while, where he's like this weird niche counter meta pick, but not like complete counters the meta, but he can counter most of the meta. And so I expect him to be like pretty relevant going into like battle hardened Richmond and these other ones. Kano's still up there going down the list. The other two big crazy ones that I'm really excited to see is Teklevossen with 5 wins. Teklevossen's kind of been on most people's radar as one of the best, probably the deck that gets the best post Dromi, to be honest. And as long as you can avoid the Katsus and you can avoid like the aggro decks, Teklevossen does really, really well into like Warriors, does really well into Brutes, can do well into Brutes. Reinhardt can be a little bit trickier sometimes, but into KO does extremely well. Prism, from what I'm hearing from accomplished Teklevossen's, like people that main the hero, is that the matchup's not that bad at all. So Teklevossen getting 5 wins is really cool. I hope this deck becomes more of a thing. It'd just be cool to see it. I know I've like shat on Teklevossen from a meta perspective, but I love the deck. It's super fun. It just hasn't been good. The other one's Riptide. Riptide at 4. This does not surprise me. Riptide, I think the more reps you get into Riptide on certain heroes, the less favored it becomes for Riptide. I think Riptide's very much a hero that benefits from not being a part of the meta. So we'll have to see how that continues moving forward. I could easily see Riptide going back down to like 1 or 2 wins, just because it's a deck where once you play against it once, you really figure out how you have to play. Like Warrior is the easiest example. I won't go through all of it, but the first time you play Riptide as a Warrior, you probably can get smoked. The second and third time, it's a lot closer because you figure out what you have to do. So that was really cool. Then obviously like Max, Uziri, Arachne. Uziri specifically, a lot of people thought Assassin was just going to explode. And this is where I'm going to talk about Assassin for a second. So I played Arachne in my last ProQuest, went 2-2, sadly bubbled at 9th. Just wasn't my day, but I had a lot of close games. My biggest game that I kind of not flopped, I didn't mistake it, it didn't go my way, was I was up 28-12 against Merrick Kemp, who was on Katsu, and he did like a high 30s bonds turn and got me down to like 8 or something crazy like that. I blocked 15 and still was at like 12 or something like that. If I would have won that, I probably would have made top 8. But regardless, I was 2-2 on Arachne, and I came into the same conclusion that most people are on, I think. So if you look at the top 5 decks right now, right, you have KO, Azalea, Prism, Victor, and Kasai. Let's go through those matchups just very briefly for Assassin in general. KO is technically, I think, Assassin favored, but you also could argue it's slightly KO favored. It's like 52-48 on either side, in my opinion. However, the difference in that matchup is if KO just hits the win button and does Cast Bones and the Blood Rush and all this other stuff, I don't care how good your Assassin deck is, you're going to lose. That's just how it goes, right? So that can be a little feels bad. So you have a 50-50 matchup, for lack of a better term, that KO can also just win, can turn into like a 60-40, 70-30 on a dime. Whereas Assassin can't really do that too much. Azalea, another one. This matchup, I don't care what you say now, is 50-50. Azalea, especially the Chiros list, it might be slightly Assassin favored. You could argue, especially on Uziri's side, that it might be like 55-45. However, Azalea can just hit the win button. If she does 17 dominate Red in the Ledger into 14 dominate Sleep Dart into, whatever, you just die. So it's a slightly favored to 50-50 matchup for Assassin. You're noticing a trend that also can just lose for Assassin because Azalea can just hit the win button. So the top 2 decks in ProQuest meta are pretty much 50-50 matchups, maybe slightly favored Assassin, but both of those decks can just beat Assassin out of nowhere. Then you have Prism, not favored for Assassin. It's like 60-40 Prism. I think on even playing fields, it might even be a little bit worse. It's a little bit better for Uziri because she naturally can run more poppers, but matchup's not favored. Victor, matchup's not favored. Uziri, again, does a little bit better into Victor and Prism than Arachne does, but both of these matchups, in my opinion, are unfavored for the Assassin. And then Kasai is slightly unfavored for Assassin, but it's also a very skill-intensive matchup that if you have a good game plan as Assassin, you can make the matchup pretty good. but you have to dedicate some sideboard slots, in my opinion. So that being said, look at the top 5 things. You have 50-50 that can slide unfavored very quickly, 50-50 that can slide unfavored very quickly, unfavored, 50-50, right? So that's your assassin matchups. And then you go down the list, and what good matchups does assassin have, right? That's the problem. It doesn't really have any good matchups. I would say Katsu can be a good matchup. Likely it's not. Bolton can be a good, but also you can just lose. Bolton can be a good matchup, but it's not super represented. Go on down the road. But when it comes to like the top represented heroes, your best shot is 50-50. So a little bit of a tangent on assassin stuff. Sorry about that. But I just wanted to kind of give my reasonings. Like, yes, assassin did get better because Dromi left, but it also, the problem with assassin as a class, not a problem. The fact of the matter with assassin as a class is it's a very much a counter deck most of the time into certain aggro decks. It's never going to be this meta deck until they buff it a ton, which they could miss fail. Because of action point economy, right? And because your deck is technically at a cap, no matter how you swing it from a power level, is limited in terms of sheer numbers, right? So it's always going to have that struggle. Nothing too crazy. I still would play Arachne. I'd still play Uziri. I'm enjoying it. The super fun deck. You feel like you're in almost every game, so it's not like it's like a bad deck. It's just I can understand why it didn't eke out more wins, I guess is the best way to put it. But we have the top 8 from the Battle Hardened San Francisco. I wanted to show this because it's super cool. 8 different heroes. KO, Prism, Betsy, Dash.io, Dash OG, OG Dash, Dory, Kano, and Victor. The cool thing about this is the Prism that won it was on Iris, or like a switchboard Iris plan. So most people thought that type of Prism was dead, and it wasn't. Betsy was a fatigue Betsy list from Naive, who had like 9 staunch responses and some crazy stuff. Super cool there. Dash.io I think is honestly a little bit better than some people were giving it credit for. Really cool stuff there. But yeah, that was kind of the meta for that, and I hope that more Battle Hardens do this. I hope we see this a lot more in the next couple of, because like I said last video that I did on Meta Report, is we're in this weird meta where we're only going to see this meta for like 6 weeks, because then Mistveil is going to come out and change it. Like, this meta in Flesh and Blood history, quote, is a very small portion. It's a very unique portion, but it's also very open. So really excited about that. And then they go through and talk about the different decks, which, like I said, I implore you to go onto this deck, deck metagame minute deck thing, and go and read about these decks, because it's really cool. Really cool stuff. Talks about the Betsy fatigue list, Dash.io, Rhinar, all that stuff. So overall, I'm really happy with where the meta's at, despite, the assassin woes. I think that it's really healthy. I think even the bottom level decks, like, Teklevossen and Levia and, Dash and Riptide and even Uziri Arachne, they're not bad decks, and they can just come out and win depending on how things go, right? It's just the only difference between them and the top level decks is the top level decks have actual good matchups, whereas the bottom level decks don't have as good of matchups, as good of like heavily favored matchups. So hopefully this made sense. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the meta and kind of where things are going. What decks are you playing? What decks are you enjoying right now? What are you excited for? Mistveil. Just want to kind of give my general thoughts on the meta as a whole. But if you like this type of content, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. If not me, it's totally fine. Go to another creator, leave a like, comment, subscribe on their stuff so we can get more people playing these games. And I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much.